Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing Magistra Vitae. We have Roman Maniple explained, otherwise known as the Roman military reforms. Might be some of the earliest reforms of the Roman military. So let's jump right in and see what we got.
Is one of the longest lasting empires. The Roman Empire is one of the longest lasting empires in history. There is more than 1,000 years between the founding of the city in 753 BC and the fall of the Western Roman Empire in
The Western, too.
476 CE. The primary factor for this longevity was certainly the Roman military. Facing wildly different opponents, the Romans would always end up on top. From the Etruscans to the Greeks, from the Carthaginians to the Gauls, whether it was facing wild barbarian hordes, unstoppable Greek hoplites, or even African war elephants, the Romans always found a way.
Do you know the way? That's a funny meme.
Although the legions had many advantages over their enemies, their ability to adapt and evolve is what allowed them to dominate the Mediterranean for over a millennium.
Yeah.
Throughout the Roman Republic, there were 4 distinct phases of military doctrine in Rome. According to legend, after Romulus founded the city and invited all sorts of shady characters, he formed the first legion. This legion consisted of 3,000 footmen and 300 cavalry. Conveniently, these numbers matched the later size of an actual legion. After Romans had conquered their neighbors, the Latins, the Sabines and the Etruscans, they had to provide 1,000 footmen and 100 cavalry each. The soldiers had to equip themselves. That meant that only well-off, land-owning citizens would serve in the military, and only the richest men who could afford a horse
Be the equestrians or cavalry.
would serve in the cavalry.
Yeah.
In reality, things were quite simpler than this. When the tribes on neighboring hills merged into a community with a singular identity under the name of Rome, they organized a primitive fighting force. This earliest form of a legion was more akin to a band of ruffians than to an actual military force. Their only goals were protecting the crops and raiding neighboring fields. At that time, Rome was controlled by kings, but these were not the kings in a classical sense. They didn't have sprawling palaces or devoted servants. These early kings were warlords, who gained command over the city and the surrounding territory. One of these kings, Servius Tullius, is credited with the first military reforms in Roman history. This brings us to the second phase of the Roman military. Servius, after conducting the first census, divided the people into 7 social classes, based on their wealth. These classes served 2 purposes. Firstly, they formed a citizen assembly and voting was done based on class, with the richest classes holding all the power. Secondly, and more importantly to our story, they had different military obligations. Richer citizens had to provide better, more expensive equipment, and they formed the core of the army, while the poor had only auxiliary duties. Originally, the Roman army was formed by the citizen levy starting in spring and ending with a festival on the 15th of October. The word legion comes from the Latin word legio, meaning draft or levy.
Oh, you learned something new.
With the expulsion of the kings, control of the legions was transferred to the consuls, but no major changes to the structure of the army were recorded at that time. Of course, King Servius Tullius is a mythical figure. Later authors attributed him with introducing these changes, which likely took centuries to emerge. Initially, the soldiers were not paid for their service, but during the siege of Veii, a need for a more professional army emerged. The first instance of soldier pay was recorded at the time, and the army was mobilized year-round. In this period, the Romans used the Greek-style phalanx formation. In the rugged terrain of ancient Greece, the phalanx was an unstoppable force. It consisted of heavily armored hoplites fighting in unison as a singular unit. But the phalanx had one simple yet catastrophic weakness.
Their sides, cavalry, etc.
To work efficiently, phalanx had to fight head-on. Attacking it from the side or the back would almost certainly spell a disaster. Furthermore, maneuvering it was painfully slow and dangerous, as the formation could break easily. Greek city-states used them with great efficiency, as there was no way to outmaneuver your enemy in the mountains. More often than not, the victorious army would simply be the one with more men.
Which is, of course, why the Battle of Thermopylae was so well, it wasn't successful, but it was very much useful for the Greeks to ultimately overcome the Persians.
Alexander the Great solved this glaring weakness by fielding the best cavalry of the age, positioning it on the flanks. This defended the phalanx from encirclement and allowed it to conquer the known world. But the Romans were never great horsemen, so they had to devise a more elegant solution. During the Samnite Wars in the 300s BC, it became clear that the phalanx was not suitable for Italian geography. The Romans faced an agile enemy that easily outmaneuvered them on numerous occasions. Rather than doubling down, they decided to change and adopt a Maniple system used by the Samnites. This phase is often called
Interesting. And by the way, Rome always adapts. That's another reason why they continuously stay a thing.
the Polybian army, after the Greek historian Polybius, who provided us with the most detailed description of the Maniples. At first, the whole army consisted of only 4 legions, numbered with Roman numerals, the first one being the most prestigious. Men in the fighting
Well, isn't that number 4 not the right? Isn't it IV instead of, you know, it's a small call out.
age, meaning 16 to 46-year-olds, were evenly distributed among the legions. The Romans believed that good soldiers made good politicians, and thus every man had to serve at least 10 years in the military before being eligible for any political office.
Oh.
Each legion usually numbered 4,200 men, but in times of great danger this number increased to 5,000. Each legion was also assigned 300 cavalry. While the army was assembling in Rome, orders were sent to allied nations instructing them on the number of men that had to be provided and the rendezvous point.
And that doesn't include like people that were camp followers or people that were aides, right?
Roman allies would together provide approximately the same number of men as Rome itself. The men were no longer divided by their personal wealth, but rather by their age and experience. There were 4 classes differing in age and equipment. The youngest and the worst equipped formed the velites. Then came hastati. The men in their prime formed the principes. These 3 classes numbered 1,200 men each. Finally, the oldest, most experienced men formed the triarii. They numbered 600 men. The velites were the youngest men in the legion. They carried a sword, javelins, and a large round shield called parma. They wore plain helmets often adorned with wolfskin for additional protection.
Additional protection? Wolfskin? I guess.
Javelins were made in such a way that they would bend on impact. This would render them useless after the first throw and prevent the enemies from using them.
Smart.
After them came the hastati. They had a large convex shield called a scutum. Although at first they had a Greek style of sword, during the Punic Wars they would adopt swords used by the Hispanic tribes. This type of sword is called Spanish sword, but it is more commonly known as gladius.
Yeah.
Additionally, they wore 2 javelins, a brass helmet and greaves. On their helmets, they wore 3 purple or black feathers, making them appear larger and striking fear into their enemies. Most of them wore a brass plate called pectorale on their chest. Richer men would wear a chainmail coat called lorica instead. The famous lorica segmentata wouldn't be introduced for another 300 years or so. Principes and triarii had the same equipment as the hastati, except that the triarii carried a long spear called haste instead of the javelin. We should note that in future videos we will mostly continue using the same nondescript soldiers we have used thus far. This will be done out of convenience and to more easily differentiate factions based on color. Having said that, we should examine the formation used during this time. Each class except the velites was divided into 10 companies called maniples.
Okay.
From each maniple, 2 men were chosen to be centurions based on merit. Centurions were not chosen for their fighting skills, rather they were the best at leading others.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
They came in pairs. In case one of them died, the maniple wasn't suddenly headless. These centurions then chose 2 optiones, or rear guard officers. Optiones were stationed at the back of the maniple and were in charge of keeping the troops in order. If the need arose, they were the first in line to replace the centurions. 2 of the bravest and strongest men were then chosen to be standard bearers, or vexillari. The Romans saw this as a great honor, and losing a standard to an enemy was considered a disaster. With all the major and minor
The standard thing is so crazily interesting to me because it's almost like a showmanship thing. It's a morale booster. It's a patriotic. It's just so many things, but it's such a vulnerable position.
roles now assigned, the legion was ready to deploy. Maniples would form 3 staggered lines in a checkerboard formation. The first line consisted of 10 maniples of the hastati. Behind them were 10 maniples of principes, and the last line consisted of 10 half-sized maniples of triarii.
Yeah.
Velites would be placed in front of these 3 lines.
Dang. Poor Valites.
lines, and their main task was to mask the Roman formation. During the first onslaught, they would throw their javelins into the enemy line and immediately retreat behind the three lines,
Yeah.
passing through the holes in the formation. Seldom did the Velites do any notable damage. It was now time for the first line, the Hastati, to engage. These were the youngest men in the military, eager to prove their worth. Most of the enemies the Romans faced didn't use multiple lines of attack. They would throw everything they got from the start, hoping to overwhelm the opponents. In a perfect world, the Romans would hope that this first line would annihilate the enemy, and the two back lines wouldn't even have to break a sweat. This rarely
So I guess if you're in the Triarii, you're just like privileged, I guess.
happened, and when the commanders noticed the first line started giving way, they signaled for retreat. Hastati would then break formation and run to safety between the second and the third line. It was now time for the Principes to attack. These were the men in their prime. Hardened from the years of fighting, they wouldn't break as easily as the first line. Sitting on the sidelines while their foes fought a pitched battle with the first line gave them an unfair advantage. This combination was usually enough
Because they're fresh.
to break even the most determined enemies. Although, in some rare cases, when the enemy exceeded Roman expectations, the Principes were overwhelmed and forced to retreat. This meant that the third line, the Triarii, would now have to be involved. The Triarii were the most
And I haven't seen too many battles or representations of battles where this is a common. Maybe I'm missing it somehow, but I don't see this in practice too often. Maybe it's just early Republic.
experienced fighting men in Rome. Veterans of countless campaigns, they were eager to join the fighting. There was a popular saying in Rome, for when things were particularly bad, it has come to the Triarii. While the first two lines were fighting for their lives, the Triarii were ordered to kneel on one knee and hold position. This was done to prevent them from preemptively engaging in order to help their countrymen.
That's crazy because we just did a video around the Zulu, and Shaka Zulu had his loin or his back cavalry, or not cavalry, his back reserves of the bull formation do the exact same thing, but mostly turn around. So they did also get overengaged. It's crazy, the parallel.
When the second line retreated, a signal was given and the Triarii rose up and marched forth. Although this meant that the battle was not going in Roman favor, they would more often than not turn the tides of battle and finally break the enemy line. While this was going on, the Roman cavalry was placed on the flanks. Their only task was to preoccupy the opposing cavalry, while the footmen dealt with the rest of the forces.
Yep.
In cases when the enemy horsemen would retreat, the Romans would slam into the back of the enemy line.
And then
This
that's
sudden
when they
charge
win.
would be enough to break even the hardest opponents. Keeping the order inside the legion was paramount. This is why the Romans built in a system of rewards and punishments that would guarantee the obedience of the soldiers.
Like decimation.
Punishments ranged widely, from eating standing up to the decimation of the Maniple. On the other hand, the rewards could be equally motivating, ranging from double rations to additional land acquired upon retirement.
Fresh
The
crowns.
whole company could take pride if one of their number won one of these rewards. The Maniple system was used up until Marian reforms in 107 BC, when
Wow.
maniples were replaced with cohorts. But that is a story for another time. We should also note that organization on the battlefield wasn't the only factor behind the success of the legions. Romans would always place the highest priority on logistics. Before encamping or engaging the enemy, they would secure sources of food and water. A great number of men were in charge of protecting the supply lines. Neglecting this aspect of ancient warfare often meant that the outcome of the upcoming battle was decided long before the legions formed their lines. Using the Greek phalanx, the Romans barely expanded outside of Latium. Adoption of the Maniple coincided with Rome's aggressive expansion. Within 200 years, they conquered all of Italy, southern France, Spain, Carthage, and Greece, and evolved from a regional power to the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean. Join us next time as we continue our discussion of the Samnite Wars.
Let's go. Can't wait for that. Guys, as always, thank you for being here. This was a good understanding of the Maniple system, as well as like some of the different classes of the Maniple system after the fact, especially with like their tiers and who faces the line first, as well as maybe the equipment of what. It's fun. It's fun. It's a tactical type video. We'll continue, of course, Magistra Vitae with the second Samnite War next time. Let me know if you have video suggestions or anything that would make more context flow within this video or other videos. But yeah, you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye bye.